Day 2 of Armadacon. Got a writers' panel this morning with Adrian and Terry, or is it Adrian and Terry? Terry, where do you get your inspiration from? Where do you think up those ideas?
I remember back in the late 60s actually trying cannabis to see if it was going to have a real effect. I don't know, I'll explain to you what it is later. Right. To see if that really would affect creativity, and it really did. In fact, I remember looking at the A key on the keyboard and thinking, wow, what a really great A key this is. What a beautiful shape it is. And there's an uppercase A and a lowercase A, and I looked at that key. And God, there was 25 other ones I could do, plus all these really great numbers and stuff, and I looked at them for absolutely ages. They're really great. Didn't do anything else. That's where I learned something very important about creativity. I don't know, the ideas kind of come along. It's a terrible thing, but you can actually train yourself to have inspiration. You just keep your mind focused in a slightly different way, and you look and listen an awful lot. One thing I have noticed is that as I've written more and more, say over the last 5 years, I've actually become a quieter person. I used to be sort of far more outgoing than I was, because I realised that everything is tuned to receive. You actually listen to all the conversations that are going on around you. Like, it wasn't long ago I was out for a drive, and I was on the way to Cambridge. And there was a thing about light opera on, and the town was holding a light opera, and it was some boring thing on Radio 4, and they were having this big audition for, and this particular light opera had like a zillion bit parts in it, and they were auditioning for slaves, handmaidens, and chattel. No, slaves, virgins, and chattels. And they said to this girl, you know, well, what are you auditioning for? And she said, and this was still quite serious. She said, well, I think I would like to be a chattel because I've never been one of the other two. and I sort of pulled in quickly and wrote it down because this was something that she'd just come out with without realising it. And I make notes all the time. So an awful lot of stuff is just simply observing things and listening.
Yeah, I find that there are two things. I do that. One example that immediately sprang to mind is I used to travel to work in a town about 5-6 miles away from where I live, and every morning I used to walk down the hill. My small town set on a very steep hill, and I used to trundle down this hill every morning, zombie-like, and get to the bottom where's the River Torridge. And it's quite nice in the mornings, you know, be reasonably refreshed by the time you got there, and wait for a lift. A friend used to take me into work, and during the 5 or so minutes that I was usually waiting there, across the river, there's this really strange shaped hill. It really looks as if somebody has got a huge fist under the ground and thrust this thing up in a slightly distorted shape from all the other fairly voluptuous, well-rounded hills that we've got there. And that sort of sparked off thoughts morning after morning. I sort of built on this, and with my mind they usually get slightly twisted, so this actually became a, what would it be like if you had a city built on a normal sort of slope or hill, and there was something very, very strange and unpleasant underneath forcing itself up, which slowly sort of permeates out and starts feeding on all the inhabitants of the city. You know, and I use that as a theme in one of the books. Where I think the danger is, as Terry says about being receptive, what you're not always aware, what I think what you're not aware of is, because of all the stimulation you're getting bombarded with. If, like me, you watch a lot of films. I mean, I probably watch more films than I read now because I don't get too much time to read. You're probably taking in things, and inadvertently, you know, you never want to copy anybody or pinch ideas, but you sometimes look back at things and realise that you're being influenced more than you did realise at the time. And I think you have to be careful, or I find I have to be careful how some of the things that I do, because there's a subconscious tendency to draw on these things. I mean, obviously, you know, I mean, I do pay attention to people, what people say, because character and dialogue is very important. I don't actually make notes, but I've got quite a good retentive memory. If I use characters, they're probably conglomerates of different people. Sort of my own sort of thoughts and emotions go into them as well. But I find I just have to tread a bit warily sometimes.
I think what I find tends to happen, if I'm working on a particular kind of idea, my brain kind of tunes in a little bit. Because it's amazing how often I pick up a final idea and I realise that for the last 6 months I've been accumulating stuff towards a particular novel. Stuff's been coming in and been slotted away. Little bits of the jigsaw have been coming in. So there's obviously you can actually have some kind of subconscious editor about what's happening. So you see and you notice things that are particularly relevant to the idea that you have in mind at the time. It sounds kind of vaguely magical, but you get used to it happening after a while.
It was going back to comment that Dave made when you were talking earlier yesterday. I do literally wake up in the middle of the night, and during the pop to the loo and back again, and I'm probably only awake for about 2 minutes. But 2 minutes is a hell of a long time for your brain to be working, and without sort of consciously having got up with that in mind. I mean, sometimes some of my awkward threads, things that I'm trying to put together consciously when I'm awake, have all fallen together while I've been asleep, and in those 2 minutes I'll have put something together. I go back to bed, sleep straight away, but the next morning it's all there, and I think it is like having a magical editor. You don't take it for granted, but it does seem to work, the processes, and the accumulation of ideas, that's something that happens to me as well. I mean, I do that. I think you get your main theme going, and even when you're doing other more mundane things, somebody's in there working away.
I think actually there is no kind of magical editor as such. What we're really talking about here is skill. In the same way that a trained carpenter is going to be able to do things without necessarily measuring and working hard at it, because he's done them a lot and he can actually do the joints and do the woodwork. In the same way that after a certain amount of time, if you're making a living at it successfully, or trying to make a living, a lot of things just drop into the subconscious mind and work there. And it probably just boils down to skill, but maybe we analyse it more than, say, a plasterer would. I mean, it astonishes me. We've got a bloke around my house at the moment, he can get his dead flat wall, with magical, without sort of having to do much to it. I try and do it, and I spend all afternoon getting it lumpy. and then it all comes up in one piece. And yet I think I'm doing it exactly the same way.
I think there are certain things that I mean, when people say, how do you write? I mean, I think it must be very difficult to tell someone how to write, but I find that I do structure things anyway. But I think this skill factor, if you like, Terry, I mean, to me it seems that that's something that you've practiced and honed over the years, almost like a tradesman has. I mean, I can look back at some of my early works, and I'm looking back a long way, but you can see a development, you can see that the characters, the dialogue, the plotting, all that side of it is sharpening up a bit. And I think this subconscious process also begins to work in the same sort of way.
I can, just as an aside, since we're going to lead from one thing to another, having seen lots of stuff, it's amazing how many people send me things, quite unasked, I have to say. The first thing you know is when something comes via the publisher. I spend a lot of time noticing what people do wrong when they're trying to write, and I can actually make a list of the things. And one of the major things is that lots of people don't notice how people really talk, how people really have a conversation. Two people having a conversation are spending most of their time working out what they're going to say next. They don't spend a lot of time listening to what the other person's saying. It has to be basically it has to be a conversation between ground traffic, air traffic control and a pilot. They listen to what each other say. All other conversations is people just reminding one another that they're alive. And people always seem to use conversations to further the plot, which the end result of which is, as you know, your father, the king, was a usurper who, and they think this is a good way of getting information across, and it really isn't, because no one ever taught one. And the other thing I notice is that people make descriptions too long, especially descriptions of characters. This was really brought home to me with an example of really bad writing, some of the worst writing I've seen for a long time. It was Rama 2 by Arthur C. Clarke and Gentry Lee, or rather by Gentry Lee and Arthur C. Clarke. Where there were 2 pages of description of a character, as a result of which you had a beautifully painted cardboard figure. It was exactly one-dimensional, because everything about this character you were being told, which is not how you describe a character. A character is described by what they say, or what they don't say, or their tone of voice, or what they don't do, or how they move. And this can, because you're intelligent people and you've seen human beings, you're able to put 2 and 2 together and work out, he's a bit of no good, or whatever. You don't actually have to have 2 pages saying what a nasty character is. It's so easy to get character in a fragment of a sentence. And those are kind of the 2 major things I noticed. But the last thing you ever do with a plot is the last thing you ever do with dialogue is use it to further the plot in any way.
Yeah, when I going back to earlier books, I was guilty of that. I thought that because I'm very, very visual writer, very descriptive. I used to, there were lots of purple passages in the Dream Laws we were talking about yesterday, the early books, and I used to think that was the way to deal with characters. That I must have a strong description. I need to get people to understand how this guy or woman looks and everything. But gradually, I've tried to come to what Terry's saying now. You do use it by the act and think and feel. And the important thing there is that you're getting a relationship with your readers. I mean, and they will put the flesh on the bones, the readers. Somebody said to me recently, you don't actually describe your characters very well. What does so-and-so really look like? And I said, well, I'm trying to give you a vague impression because, you'll have your own idea, you'll build up your own idea, they'll be more vivid for you. I mean, how many of us are really disappointed when we see a movie of one of our favourite books and they, oh God, that's not so-and-so, he doesn't look like that, or she doesn't look like that. Well, I mean, whoever they picked, they probably wouldn't be right for it.
One of the best pieces of description I can recall, I say through gritted teeth, was in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where a Vogon spaceship was described as hanging in the air in the same way that bricks don't. First of all, that's a description that only an extremely good computer could possibly work out, but human beings can understand it instantly, and it gives you exactly the right idea from what is actually one short nonsense sentence, and it tells you everything about the fact that it's massive, the fact that it looks as if it should be falling down, the fact that it isn't. It just gives you in half a sentence. That's a superb piece of description.
Tea break, fellas.
It's the commercials. Rich reps stuff that comes and made of.
You carry on, I'll be mother.
Terry, can I ask you something? I mean, curiosity. Obviously, you've made a great success out of humorous writing. Were you always, did you start by writing humour? Were your early works humorous books, or was it something that you suddenly came to?
I think everything I've done has been light rather than humorous.
People say
I don't actually think it's... There's a difference between trying to write humorous and trying to write funny. Trying to write funny is you have drawers with names like Snot Gobble. Now, you can get away with that for about 2 pages, and then you may as well become American.
That's yours.
No, I want the other type.
Oh, you want the green one? I should have known better. That's mine now.
I've got a mucus theme.
Obvious.
Couldn't get away with it all.
Actually, you're talking about building things up and building up characters. How do you start? I mean, you especially, Terry, your world's kind of different. Do you build the world around the plot? Or do you build the plot around the world?
No,
The
plot is absolutely paramount. You bend the world to fit the plot. But as far as characters are concerned, the key thing here, well, first of all, it depends on how important individual characters are. But just go for archetypes. As with Granny Weatherwax, the kind of feisty, tough old biddy is a kind of archetype. You can just plug into that. You know, we're talking here Nora Batty with a bit more intelligence and slightly better legs. So you can. What I can do is borrow. In a sense, it's kind of vampirism. I can borrow what you know already. I can just show you what's already in your mind. And that's basically how I did it. I mean, from my point of view, my favourite three characters are the three witches called Weird Sisters and Witches Aboard. And they're ones that I only really have to give an intelligent person a little bit of hints about, because everyone knows, you know, the character of the New Age hippie that's got just a bit too old to be a New Age hippie and is still kind of wearing the beads and the flowers. And everyone knows the kind of jolly old granny type that's always getting pissed and swearing. Because you can see them in Woolworths every day, and they have this kind of these tight white curls, and they smoke like chimney. And everyone knows the kind of tough old lady. So all I have to do is show you what you already know. But no, the plot is absolutely, as I said yesterday, I've never mapped the Discworld because it's the plot that's more important than the place where the plot is happening.
Yeah, when I started again, I used the plot was everything, and the characters were sort of bent to fit into that. I mean, they were almost props, if you like, in a play, rather than the characters. And what I find now is that I get the bones of the plot. I like to know before I start a book, what the theme is, pretty well what's going to happen in terms of the action. But then I find that the characters, and certainly often with the minor characters, they start to dictate the plot anyway. If you've got interesting characters, you know, you find yourself wanting to know what happens, even if somebody comes on stage for a short time. I mean, if they're interesting enough, they try to grab my attention and say, come on, I want a bit more space, so you have to control that. And I think plot and character are very, very interwoven, because after all, I mean, whatever our story is, essentially it's about people, it's about characters. The danger is, I think, that with me, I find that I could very easily sprawl. I'm trying to get away from the idea of doing series of books now. I mean, that was okay for the two that I did, because I really felt I was telling one very long story anyway. But I'm again trying to refine the craft, going back to what we were saying earlier. I'm in the process. I've been writing for probably 20 years now, and I still feel I'm in a growing process, and I still don't feel I've achieved, you know, the best that I hope I can achieve eventually. And the more I go on, the more the interweaving seems to play a crucial part in it.
Winding back a bit to being better on, you know, writing humorously, I don't really think you can set out to write humour any more than you can set out to write horror, because there's more to horror than sort of pasting some nasty bits on, and there's more to humour than shoving some gags in. You actually, what you do has to start at a far more fundamental level. I find it very. I think I find it very hard to write in a much different style than I do, because it is my basic style, and I don't have to put that many gags in the book. What I do is put in incongruous situations, things which are naturally funny of themselves. In Witches Abroad, there's a whole sequence where I have my three witches who've never really travelled much, and you put them in what are classic tourist situations, you know, where you're getting different food, different bedding, different customs, whatever. Then these are natural. There's anything that's going to happen from that moment on is going to have to be amusing if I'm doing it right. But you actually generate the thing. You actually let the situations generate the humour. Whereas, you know, if you write in horror and just go and paste a lot of maggots in there, it's going to look sticky. some of the best horror and best suspense I've ever seen or read have been done with very, very simple plots, and in a very, very simple way, but it's really, really become unpleasant because of the way it's been handled.
Yeah, I think that I don't write very much short fiction, but it's the reader really identifying, as with character, it's identifying with the emotion. If you're doing, to me, the most successful horror is where you're thinking, oh God, yes, I felt that sensation myself. You know, whether it's a story about, you know, it's not so much the external horrors like your vampires and your shambling corpses, which you know, have essentially become fun now. Although you wouldn't if you really met one in a graveyard. Well, I thought so. But it's the recognition of the more unpleasant emotion. And there are a number of writers in the field that really do explore that. Sometimes they externalise the personal demon, as they call it, and turn it into something like the way that Clive Barker will do with his, in a very, very graphic way. And the best of it works successfully. I think the worst of it, I'm not so sure about. When I think the best humour for me is, as Terry was saying, is where you laugh. You're laughing at yourself. You're laughing at the sort of stupid things that you do as well, and you recognise that. I think one of the classic examples of that is Basil Fawlty. I always thought that Basil Fawlty was the rude bugger that we'd all like to be if only we had the guts to be so.
Are there any questions from the floor? Dave?
Hello. Dave. Okay, as you shout loudly, have either of you ever got a good way into a outline of a book or writing a book and have found it's not working and either gone back to scratch or completely scrapped the idea? And if so, why?
Yeah, it used to happen to me more so in the earlier days, and I've still got about 6 or 7 finished manuscripts actually, all partly finished, sitting in a cupboard, and I cannibalise them sometimes for some of the ideas. But usually now, you know, I've thought about my books a long way ahead. I mean, I've usually got 2 or 3 things in the back of my mind which I decide which one I'm going to start on when I finish the current one. So it's usually pretty well formed, and I've got enough enthusiasm about it to start it. But a couple of years ago, I did do one which I was quite keen on, but the publishers didn't really feel they got a synopsis of it in a few chapters, and they quite liked it, but they said it wasn't. They didn't think that it was, you know, that it was going to be as viable as other stuff. And I gave them an alternative idea which they really liked, so I went on with that. But I might get it out again and dust it off and push on with it, because I quite like the idea. But if you lose enthusiasm for an idea, it shows in the writing, I think, very quickly. And, you know, yeah, I'll be trying to move on to something else.
I work on the hang gliding basis that when you start writing, it's like standing at the top of a hill with a hang glider, and you're standing there and you've got 80 pounds of assorted nylon and metal and things on your shoulders. And you run like hell down the side of the hill. Now, at some point, if you've done it right, you're not actually having to carry it anymore. It's carrying you, and all you're having to do is steer. And I've recently scrapped 25,000 words, which is about an approximate quarter or third of a novel, because I was getting very close to the bottom of the hill and I was still running. And everything was written, there were plenty of gags and the basic idea was that, but somehow just things weren't nicking in such a way that I was happy with the way it was going to go. And I think it was because a fault of my technique is that sometimes I'll begin a book not knowing how it's going to end. But I will know that it's going to end, and I will know that there is an ending up there, I just don't know what it is. On this occasion, I think it may be that there wasn't really an ending, given all the various things I was postulating at the start, that there wasn't really a satisfactory ending. And I had to get that far to realise that I wasn't doing it in the right kind of way. So I scrapped it. As you say, you can cannibalise ideas. In fact, I already have done so. But it's still sitting there at the moment. I've got on my hard disk, I've got a directory called The Pit. And everything that I don't use, and all the bits that get cut out, I had to cut 5,000 words out of moving pictures, and so I took out a whole plot strand. And that's all, that's in The Pit. And I can remember that one. It's the gang of feral dogs that were around Morpeth, and they're led by Big Fido, who's a poodle. But he weighs 16 stone. and he's got, and he was a perfectly normal poodle, and one day he looked at his bowl, and he got Fido written on it. And he looked at his blanket and it got Fido written on it. And he looked at his kennel and it got Fido written on it. And everything went red. And when he came to, he'd eaten the whole family. Yes. And the whole thing, and it fitted in very well the rest of the plot, but the book was just that bit too long, and so the rooftop chase and everything else. That's all down in The Pit. There's lots of stuff in The Pit.
Expect a Bruton novel then.
Well, there's one now, one day I'll haul stuff back out. You never actually use it, you just rewrite the ideas.
Do you find that it's a wrench to do it? I mean, again, it's something that I think you have to learn to do as time goes on, but you've got to learn to edit, you've got to be able to edit your own work. And I think a lot of writers, well, I certainly at first was prone to think, well, I like this too much, and you've got to make cuts and changes. So it must be a wrench to take out something like that, but then you've always got the knowledge that you can perhaps do something more. You've got something good for the future, you can use it again.
Yeah, also the other thing is, scrapping work that you've done for a long time is tough. And it is tough for a few days until you're doing something new. Yeah. And once you're doing something new, something old, what tough, that was yesterday. So it kind of hurts at the time, but you actually have to do it. I edit an awful lot, far more than people might think, given the finished product. But you really have to edit all the time. Which means taking out important stuff and taking out unimportant stuff and trying to keep the thing balanced. But it's absolutely essential. But some of the stuff in The Pit is astonishing. I could never make a novel out of it. I never know.
Plus you've got a new world there, like this world.
Down in The Pit, stuff generating it of its own accord.
Characters in there just waiting for stories to slot into them.
No, I don't think I ever throw away entire characters, but I make notes about entire characters. I've got one character I've been waiting to use for a long time. He's so nervous, he's got all these facial tics and things, but he's got more facial tics than he's actually got room for. So as it were, so the twitching eyelid has to wait, the tics actually have to form a cue. Every single nervous tic is and that was actually based on someone I met once who was clearly so nervous and just couldn't get it all in at one go. All these characters wait for the light of day.
You're talking about nerves, or anxieties more, and tying that in with what we were saying earlier. And I like Terry's idea of the hang gliding thing. I can understand that perfectly. With every book that I write, even if I think, I've got a really good idea, this is a good novel, this is even better than the last one, which is one of the things that you always hope, or I always hope, that I'm going to be improving. You start writing the book, and your enthusiasm may be high, and you're working away, but there is always a point at which you know whether or not it's right. You usually. Yes, in a sense you saw, you think, this is it, this is working out, thank God, I can sleep again. But sometimes it takes me a lot longer to get to that point. Once I've got to that point, it may be halfway through the book. Once I've got to that point, I'm happy, and I'm happy with what I've done, and I might go back and make some revisions. But until I reach that point, then my equivalents of nervous tics and that will still be with me. But I do relax a heck of a lot, and I'm much happier. And I probably write better for it once I've got through that little barrier.
There's two significant points which theoretically come at 1/3 and 2/3 the way through. There is one where, well, we've got a novel here, we are definitely flying, we're going to keep going. And then 2/3 the way through, it's realising that effectively you've finished. I mean, yes, you've got to do from here to the end, but you know what is between here and the end, and it's almost, not exactly a mechanical matter, but all it is now is a job of work to finish it off. The way things may change a bit even then, but you know that these are the kind of two significant things. I can't speak for Adrian, but I say that even now, when I know that unless something really weird has been going on, I'm going to sell whatever I write. Every novel is still a first novel. You're still writing that certain kind of terror. And I bung it off to the publisher. If I haven't heard back from a week, I find some excuse just to ring him up and in the course of the conversation, like, oh, what happened to it? Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, I do the same. Yes, I do. I mean, even when I felt, I think I've got this on. Well, I'm pleased with this. It is a great relief, and my editor always says to me, "You always do this thing. You always say how relieved you are, but I mean, you know it's a good book." And I say, "Well, I need you to tell me that, you know."
Do you ever get writer's block?
No. Do you?
No. At the moment, I'm working. I still have a full-time job, so I'm. You know, the time that I have to write is very precious to me. So I'm busting at the gut to get at my word processor at the times that I can write, which is mainly at weekends and that. I've had times this year when I haven't been able to write as much as I'd like to, because I've changed job and it's meant learning new things, and it's pretty mentally fairly tiring. But I think it's, apart from the odd day when I suppose we all get up on Sundays and we don't feel like doing anything in particular, I've got things, a backlog of things or things stored up where I've been thinking about the next chapter. So I can sit down, and I've disciplined myself over the years to just sit down and get on with it, and once into the first paragraph on the way. Very rare that I get.
I think that I never had anything approaching writer's block when, like you, I had to snatch writing time out of what was a busy schedule anyway. I was very surprised to find out I was getting writer's block once I could write full time. Although the way things go these days, as I was saying the other day, I have to snatch writing time even now because the business of being an author seems to take up a lot of time. But the key thing is that no one on God's earth can sit in front of a screen for 8 hours a day writing. I mean, there's been maybe 2 or 3 authors in the 20th century that could actually they used to dictate an awful lot. You can actually sit there dictating to a secretary far easy. It's not writer's block. It's just God's way of telling you that if you sit here any longer, your brain's going to turn to cheese, and you've got to get up and do something because you just kind of run down. And in fact, you wake up the following day and you can carry on. So I think writer's block is an American idea, and it is because sort of fundamental to the whole sort of American view of the world is that no one was to ever be told they're no good at anything. So you get lots of people that you know, as far as writing talent is concerned, they would make a really ace bricklayer. No one's actually, but you mustn't ever deny anyone's right to think that they could be good at something. And so they can then spend their entire bloody life having writer's block, because that prevents them having to admit that they're actually no good at it. And anyway, the other thing is that since I spent so many years on newspapers, you're not allowed to have writer's block because they want 500 words in half an hour's time. If they don't get it, seriously unpleasant men will speak to you in loud voices, and you just don't want that. So it gets kind of burned out of you. But there are times when I just look at the screen and think, Jesus, I can't write another word, let's go and have another game of Wing Commander. and part of the time is knowing when to switch off and when to do something else.
I certainly have, you know, for me, I like to work in the mornings. You know, 8:30 till 12:30 is roughly, you know, it's almost that religiously strict, you know. I find it, I tend to do my letters and my bits of reading and all the rest of it in the evenings. But if I sit down in the afternoons to start, it's hell. It's not so much a block. It's just that my mind is just not in the right gear. I can't get up past second gear. You know, if that. But that's a different kind of block. I think you begin to know fairly quickly when are your best times to write, and you find yourself making a real effort to close in on those times. And my family and friends and that all know that Saturday and Sunday mornings, unless something particular is happening, you know, I'm locked away because I work alone. I mean, I like to shut myself away and have no distractions. Okay, 10:30 maybe creep up, tap on the door and push a cup of coffee through the grill. So that's all right, you know, but otherwise, it's best to leave him alone. You know, best to let him work.
I think that if I feel I ought to be writing for one reason or another, I can't get my mind around it. The sensible thing is to go and edit stuff you've already done. You go back into the text and tinkering around. Before you know where you are, some original writing is being done. You've got to know, oh, twiddle, I've got to do that, oh, look what I've done there. And you, a little bit here and a little bit there, and you creep up on yourself, and suddenly you're working again. There are always ways around it. The thing is, you either have to work around it, or you don't become a professional writer. It really boils down to that. You cannot accept the imposition of writer's block. You have to fight against it.
A lot of people. Sorry, Terry.
No.
I was just going to say, do you keep to a strict routine, or do you just tend to sort of sit down when inspiration hits you, or your publisher?
I work on a very simple basis that every moment I'm awake, I ought to be writing, and so that everything I do that's not writing is time that I'm stealing from writing. That writing is the ground state of being. Because if you call yourself a writer, that's what it should be. So it actually works. Yeah. It does actually work. It's a recipe for going cuckoo after about 2 years, I think. But so far, I've kept my sanity. Isn't that so, Angus?
Well, that is.
The way I cope with it it's brought home to me by things that people who know me, and particularly my wife, have said to me, is that I change personality. I have my administrator persona, which is where I work. You know, I'm an administrator in a college, so that's a totally different person apparently. And I go there, and I switch into that mode, you know, and then I can switch to my writer mode, and I can switch to other modes and that. But ideally, for me, you know, I mean, if I could, writing would be my main thing, and it would take up as much of my time as I can do it. You know. But I think that if I wasn't able to switch into these other modes, and that, yeah, my fuses would blow. I'd be getting traumatised very quickly, and sometimes it creeps in. You know, I mean, it's the only way. If you're only able to work at weekends on a book which you're really, you know, really keen on, and it's working well, and you're very excited about it, and you're living it, and you're living the characters and all the rest of it. To get up on a Monday morning and leave all that behind. You really have got to switch. You really have got to throw a switch, and you've got to forget that. Because if I let that intrude into my job, I'd be sitting there like this very, very quickly. You know, I mean, you can't. And then it's quite easy then to come back at the weekend, get up on a Saturday morning, and I'm alive again. You know, different person.
So do you find writing therapy? You know, all these weird and wonderful characters, kind of. Well, you said earlier that they make you calmer. Do you feel you get rid of all your sort of inhibitions and?
Well, no, they don't make you calmer, but you spend a lot of time internalising things and being acting as a receptor. No, I don't know. I don't know if it's therapy. I don't know if it's therapy from what. Or no, that's said, hey, no, I don't really know. It's quite handy. One thing I have is that if I'm working out ideas via characters, you can sometimes have a character come up with an entirely different point of view than you personally would come up with. And that is kind of weird when you and that's where you think that you're probably doing things right, if you can make a character act entirely different from the way you think it's right for a character to act. But no, I don't use writing as an escape from anything.
I just wondered whether you used it to get rid of, I mean, things like hardware salesman. I get the impression you really suffered from hardware salesman at one point. That druid felt like a kind of a personal,
yeah. Well, I did think Good Omens because just occasionally I put things in if I feel very strongly. Now I did a thing in Good Omens, and I just bought some computer software, and I can hear the chuckle of recognition out there. And you get this little box of discs, but before you open it, there's this thing printed in like 1-point type, which says that opening the box automatically means that you've accepted these. And you read these things, and it basically says, if it's not in the box, tough titty is not our fault.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, it's a word processor, but if you can't use it to word process, tough titty. And it goes on, you look at a packet of cornflakes, what does it say? If these cornflakes entirely fail to satisfy, please send this box back to Nabisco or whatever, and we'll give you some more. And they cost about 75p. You spend 250 quid on some computer software, and they basically say, if it doesn't do what they've told you it's going to do, hard luck. and they let these bastards get away with it. So it really is weird. I mean, I felt strongly enough about that to put in the occasional thing, and you can get the occasional barb in here and there against things. But I don't know how you think that doing it is going to make the mighty word perfect corporation tremble in its boots.
But does it make you feel
It makes me feel and also it makes me feel a lot better than a lot of other people, as I've seen around here just now, go, wow, yes, that's it. You were saying this yesterday when people say, yes, that's what it's really like.
Terry, how do you go about coping with working with someone else? Sorry. Using, when you cooperate with Neil Gaiman on, how do you go about?
You make them do what you want. Actually, Gary Cornell came up with something very opposite, talking about working together. It says it's not that 50% of you, that each of you does 50% of the work, each of you does 90% of the work. The way we did it then, and I can't really speak as an expert because it's the only time I've ever done it, and other people do it in different ways. It wasn't a case of, the way the Americans tend to do it is one person writes a draft and the other person goes in and noodles with that draft. We did the whole thing from the ground up, each of us doing bits. The ad hoc way we had of working, it's simple. I've got a track record writing novels, Neil hadn't. So I became, if you like, the editor and taskmaster. Because the other thing is the practical problem about two people 120 miles apart doing something is that it would be different now, but in those days we had no reliable means of electronic communication. We could connect computers together with modems and then spend the whole evening at cross purposes and ringing each other up and saying, I'm getting lots of little faces and shit like that all over the After 3/4 of an hour and about 8 phone calls, you actually managed to transmit about 2,000 words. You could have actually phoned the guy out and sneezed at him in Morse code. We can actually do it now. When we were doing the first draft of the film script, we were both members of CompuServe. So crappy are BT rural lines that the quick, efficient way was for me to go onto CompuServe and leave what the work I'd done in Neil's mailbox on the computer in Ohio or someplace. And later that evening he would dial CompuServe in America and download it from Ohio or wherever it was. So in order to get this script 120 miles, electronically it was doing about 10,000. This is from the global village. What we would do, I would hold the master copy, and sometimes work would have to stop for 24 hours because stuff was in the post, because the nightmare, the absolute nightmare, which I knew would happen if we let it, was that somehow we'd end up with 2 master copies in existence with little minute changes, and we'd never be able to spot which was which. The truckers, wow, what a fun, that was fast.
Yeah, we have to apologise to you for waking your wife up at 9:30.
Oh, yes.
You're not feeling very
How?
We had a police escort on the way back, chasing us most of the day.
You have never been in a car with Gary. Hi, Gary. He's
I
fast.
said they're bound to be after 9.
I was about 9:30.
No, I said they're bound to be after 10 because you said about 2 hours. You said.
There's a preview showing in my room. Tickets are £50 each.
Interesting. So, the last thing I wanted was 2 master copies, we worked on the phone who did what. I did a bit more than Neil of that anyway. But it also fell to me to do an awful lot of the glue that no one wanted to do, because it was easy to do set piece scenes, and then we're written on the kind of on the kind of plot somewhere, get A and B to F, and X and Y have got to C to, and then what that really is like 3,000 words where you have to move people around and then shove extra bits in. So I ended up probably doing near 75% of the book. I would probably say because had we'd done it any other way, it would have been like 3 months longer to do. You cannot really do it democratically. You have to have long discussions, and then someone has to go in there and write. It is very hard. It is harder to work with someone else than it is to work by yourself. And there are people who do it all the time, and I find that quite astonishing. And I think the classic American way, well, I'm not telling you anything, you can see, there tends to be a big tradition now in the States because it is so hard for new writers to get published. So you'll see like Mr. A.J. famous author, and Mr. Fred, never heard of him, have both worked on a book. And what that usually means that Mr. A.J. famous author has had long discussions with Fred, never heard of him, and given him lots of précis and Fred, never heard of him, has gone away and done draft 1, which Mr. famous author has gone and sprinkled fairy dust all over. So and he's done quite a lot of the work and hasn't got much of the money, and that tends to be the tradition. That's probably a lot easier to do. I think it would drive me up on a bend. So neither of us have got any more plans for doing it. It was fun to do it once. Don't think I could do it again.
Why was it Neil Gaiman? And why?
I've just known him for a long time. What it really happened? Yeah. He came up with the real idea of a baby swap going wrong in the Omen, and didn't know what to do with it. He'd done about 5,000 words. He was going to do a short story. About a year afterwards, I said, I know what could be done with that. And I said, so I tell you what, either sell me the idea, or I suppose we better do it together. And that about the best decision he ever made in his life was, oh, well, let's do it together. If I'd actually said to him, I'll buy the idea off you for 25,000 quid, he might just have given in. And so we did, and it changed. And then it turned out that he'd lost it off his disc. The only copy in existence was the printout he sent me, which I had to retype in. So I made mega changes to the first bit. And then other things, it was one of those things where the original idea almost gets lost gets lost under all the other ideas that there's a creep round it. The one thing I most regret about Good Omens is I lost I lost the Discworld slot because they couldn't publish. They published it in the spring in place of a Discworld book. The other one was that the whole Agnes Nutter subplot was in fact the original Discworld plot, which we were working away, and I thought, oh bloody hell, I pasted that one in quick because we needed it. I always wanted to blow up a witch with gunpowder, as I lost it, and I don't think I'll be able to use it again. I wouldn't have been allowed to blow up Granny Redderance or Granny Og, who were like candidates for it. But it was fun. I mean, the other problem. Sorry to take so much time on this, but the other problem was it took 9 weeks to write, and that was fun. It took another 9 weeks to rewrite, because we had two separate lots of editors. In fact, 3 really. That was less fun. And then it took 6 months of negotiation, and that was absolutely hellish. It was, because there were 3 agents and innumerable publishers and everything else involved, and that just got things at times got really out of hand. I mean, Neil and I, when we meet, we can still talk happily to each other about such things as the weather, what time of day it is. And I'm amazed things have survived that much. Everyone ought to try that sort of thing once, but not twice.
I think from our point of view, it was well worth it because it gave us a brilliant book.
You can
really did.
Yeah, it's
shareable. You can't. The trouble with your books is you can't read them and keep quiet. You're all sharing bits. Yeah. You read them on a bus and you die to say, "Let me read you this bit." People think you're strange when you do that.
Let's take another question, one that we can generally talk about.
One last question, please. It worked quite hard this morning.
What do you hate most and like most about being an author?
Well, I think I've covered mine. It's the frustrations I have in not being able to give as much time to it as I ought to be. I'd love to be in Terry's position where I could, well, in theory anyway, be able to write as much as I would like to write. That's what I hate most. What I like most about it. I think I'm happiest when I'm writing. I'm on fire when I'm writing. I'm more alive when I'm writing than at any other time. Sounds a bit strange in some ways, but I don't know. It does something to me that nothing else does. That's it.
Well, I have to say, as a kind of kicker, that being a writer is very nearly as much fun as anyone can have by themselves. If I make any complaints, I have to be taken against that background. What I hate most, and this happens to me more and more, is that as you become, as you are perceived to be more successful, there are all kinds of forces at work to try and turn you from a writer into an author. I'm very clear about what the difference is. A writer is some kind of working Joe who comes out and sits down and writes and produces stuff, and it gets published, and that's fine. But an author, you can be an author without ever really writing at all. An author hangs around at parties and things. A writer is writing. An author has written. And there were lots of people going around, as authors that last wrote kind of like 5 years ago. And one of the reasons for this is that I'm already getting dates in my diary for things well into 1993. Every village in this country now seems to have a literary festival. And would you come along for a few days? Every school has its there's children's book week in every autumn. I think we've passed it this week, this autumn. But I'm getting them for next year. And all these things come in, and every single one of them is a worthy request. I'm not kidding. Every post, every day, brings in at least one, probably two letters from people that want something in some way. And every single one of them is perfectly worthy, and none of them actually realise that there's a zillion other people that are writing to me as well. And it fills up and it fills up, especially since I get some. I got somebody the other day to come and talk to a school in Brussels. You know, I went back and said, well, yeah, well, next time I happen to be passing. And it becomes, and you realise that if you actually let go, you can spend the whole time administering to all this stuff. And what maybe is not realised is that this is separate, that they're preventing you from doing the very things that they want you there for having done in the first place. And it really does accumulate, and it's really begins to, between now and the rest of November, I have 2 days when I'm not actually doing something. Admittedly, there's a bit of a signing tour going on, but that's going to occupy a fortnight. And then December is now coming up. You know, December's now got about 6 or 7 dates in it. I've got to do things. January's the whole of next spring, and March is sort of going to be another lost month. And all this, I've actually got to keep up a writing schedule, and it becomes really, really, really weird. And I'm getting increasingly sensitive to the fact that it's like kind of cholesterol in the creative bloodstream. Everything just fills up with this stuff. And yet every single letter is, is a nice letter, please come and do this, and the whole school would love you to come. You don't want to say no. In fact, now I find I'm saying no for very, very good reasons, because I've already accepted something else for that day. It's a tough pity I can't come. But that's very, very weird, the way that there's this conspiracy almost to prevent you writing.
Well, Adrian, Terry?